Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So today is a big day on Don's Big Tire Supra as we are playing around with turbo placement. And as soon as I get the turbo placed, then the process of building the header can begin. So what I did in the intro montage was converted my floor jack to a turbo holding fixture. Now normally, or in the past I should say, when I have done turbo locations, typically I'll bring my engine hoist over and rig up something with zip ties and ratchet straps and so on and so forth to get the turbo in a happy location. With this needing to be kind of a bit more precise of a turbo location, as we really don't have a whole lot of space to fit everything in here, I wanted something that was a bit more solid and with less ability to flop around. So what I did is took an aluminum plate, drilled a hole so I could use this fastener that holds the jack pad on there, and then just built a simple tube structure that terminates at a 2-bolt flange that bolts in place of the oil return flange. So pretty simple, but pretty effective. And now I have almost, or essentially, free reign to play around and figure out exactly where this turbo needs to sit. So with the turbo in its rough location, the first thing that I need to do is to get the elbow that is actually leading up into the turbine housing established. So I have a 3.5-inch bend right over on my toolbox here, and this is a bend with legs on it. I'm going to cut the legs off to make this as short as it possibly can be, so that way I allow myself as much clearance as possible down in kind of this valley in this area where most of the header is going to live. So let's go ahead and make those cuts, get that elbow welded to the flange, and let's see what we can do with this. So now that I have the elbow leading into the turbine flange welded and it is located in the car right there, I need to figure out my collector locations. And we have enough materials to make a true collected tri-Y setup, which I'm going to try to do. I'm unsure if I'll exactly be able to use this 2-into-1 collector, but I'm going to try my best to do so. So what I need to do is to cut these legs off of all of these collectors. And if you look at this 2-into-1 collector, you can see that it flares out to match our 3.5-inch diameter. So I'll cut this back as far as I can to make the overall collector as short as it can possibly be. And these guys right here, I can pretty much cut off right on these welds to make them as short as possible. Once I do that, I'll have a pretty good idea of how everything is going to fit together, if I can use the 2-into-1 collector, and where I need to go from here. Today, the goal on Don's car is to knock out the primary collector location and the secondary tubes. So from the 2-into-1 collector here, what I'm going to do is run 2¼ inch tubes up to where the 3-into-1 collectors are located. And I think on this 2-into-1 collector, since I can fairly easily get around and weld both of the tubes into here, I'm going to not use the dual slip cups, as that will also save me a little bit of space, and that will be a good thing on this setup. So in looking at this, I think it should be fairly straightforward. If I take one of my 3-into-1 collectors, well, one of them will live kind of in this area, and I think the other one will live kind of in this area. The only thing that I can see right now that's going to be a little bit tight is this #1 primary, getting it around the end of the bolt for one of the cross bolts, which again, we talked about those before, but you guys can see the bolts in there right there. And again, the point of these is with how crazy that people run large or any turbos in competition, if the turbo comes apart, like the shaft breaks or something along those lines, and you then have a turbine wheel that's free to go wherever it wants to go, the point of the cross bolts is to break up that turbine wheel so smaller fragments are coming out rather than an entire wheel. But that being said, this end of this bolt might need to get trimmed down just to give myself a little bit more clearance. I won't know until I actually begin running the primaries. But to get to the point of the primaries, we have to knock the secondaries out. So let's go ahead, start fitting some tubes and seeing where we can go with this. Today is the day that we begin running primaries on Don's car. So I started playing around with this a little bit already and realized very quickly that we need some tight radius bends to make the front bank or the front 3 cylinders fit the way that I want them to. So rather than just not get anything accomplished today, I'm going to move on to the rear bank and get these 3 knocked out and get them all fit into place. One other thing that I had to do is enlarge all 6 of the collector ports, as the port size on the collectors when we initially got them, it was a little bit too tight to fit the 1 3/4 inch primary tubing, or at least that section of the primary tubing, into the collectors. So in doing so, I don't think I'm going to be able to use the dual slip cups for these either, but not a big deal. I can run them as single slip collectors, weld everything together, provided that I can get my torch in here to do so, and everything will work out all right. So like I said, I'll focus on the rear today, the front at a later date. So without any more said, let's go ahead and get to these rear 3 primaries. Yesterday I completed the rear bank of Dawn's new turbo header, and today I'm going to work on the front bank. So I had some tight radius bends that came in earlier today, and that will allow me to more effectively build this front bank. But in trying to fit the tubes in, I need to expand the collectors just a little bit more, the collector ports I should say. So I'm going to use my handy dandy Harbor Freight exhaust tubing expander kit. So I have the mandrel that I'm going to use already in the fab room over here, but just to show this kit, it's a pretty nice all-encompassing kit, bunch of different sizes, so on and so forth. So the way that this works is I have this mandrel right here, where the more that you tighten it down, the more that it wedges this four-sided pyramid essentially down into these panels, and it pushes them out, and just due to the force of doing so will cause the tube to become larger. So I have one of my tight radius bends right here. Like I said, I've tried to fit it in a few times, and although they do sleeve in, I'd like to have it sleeve a little bit more easily. So with this setup, I can use my good old Earthquake Earl impact and just run this bolt down. And this expander setup, you can use it with an impact. Other ones you have to use them with a wrench or a ratchet or something like that, which would work, but then I would have to really tightly fasten this whole header assembly down as opposed to just kind of ramming it home with the impact. So one other thing that I'll get out is my digital caliper. So that way, when I achieve kind of the slip fit that I'm looking for, I can measure the outside diameter of it, and then as I am expanding the other two, I can match up that OD, and it should sleeve perfectly fine. So let me go get the digital caliper, get some headphones on, this gets kind of loud, and let's go ahead and expand these just a little bit more. And after a little bit of additional expanding, you can see tube slides into that port, and this port with ease. So we're now ready to put this back in the car and figure out these three primaries. Yesterday, I got Don's header all welded up, at least the main body of the header. And this is what we are left with. So I didn't have a great opportunity to show the front primaries, so we'll take a look at those now. Primary 3 to the top, primary 2 to the top rear, primary 1 to the bottom. And you can see that I curved primary 1 just to provide a little bit more clearance to the turbine housing, to the turbine outlet, all of that. And I'm pretty happy with the way that it has, or at least the product that we have so far. So another angle over here, looking up over top of it. The header looks pretty wild in there. I'm very happy with the aesthetics of it. So the next thing to do is to figure out wastegate location. And like we talked about earlier, I think in the intro of this series, we have this tile compressed gas wastegate here. So one of the notes here, right here, is to place the wastegate in an easily serviceable location where wiring reaches. And I think pretty much the spot that it needs to be is tucked down in this area here. That will still provide a reasonably easy place to reach the wastegate if it needs to be serviced. And I'll do some pretty trick coping and forming of the wastegate provision to still have it actually act as a functional wastegate, as opposed to the normal race car way of doing things where you put the wastegate on, it's just kind of there, and whether it works or not doesn't really matter all that much. Actually having the ability to turn boost up or turn boost down and having the wastegate react accordingly, well, I can't see a way that that would be a detriment, especially with a compressed gas wastegate like this, where you can force the wastegate to be shut or allow it to be open and actually dial in the boost that you are running. That would be handy for different track conditions and so on and so forth. So I think that's what we're going to go with. So I checked with Don to make sure that that location down there will work for him. Once I hear back from him, either confirming or denying how I want to do it, then we will get going with it, get the wastegate knocked out, and then we'll have to figure out the locations for the EGT bungs from there. I received the go-ahead from Don for my idea for the wastegate provisioning, so let's go ahead and get to it and start knocking this out. So I have these 2.5-inch tight radius bends here. Again, all red label 321 stainless from Stainless Bros. And these are what we will make the wastegate provision out of. So this one, I'll use it for my starting point, do some coping, some fitting, and see what I can't come up with for this wastegate provision. Well, we're almost wrapped up with Don's header. And I just finished installing the EGT bungs, as you guys saw. They are still all hot off the press. And the last two orders of business are to brace the wastegate provision and then to, of course, add a BPA logo to this. So I'm going to focus my efforts on the wastegate provision brace first, as that will be the more difficult of the two things to accomplish. And I think I'll take some sheet and build something that fills in this area right here, or the area on the other side, and just braces that provision to the rest of the elbow leading up to the turbo. I think that'll be a nice, effective way to do it. And this wastegate provision has enough leverage on everything else here that if I were to not brace it, then I would really highly run the risk of fracturing some portion of this. But as you guys can see, I did this nice 2.5 inch bend that is coped and merged pretty nicely to the elbow. So this should provide a nice flow path for the wastegate to actually function if it needs to. So let me go ahead, grab some stainless sheet out. We'll get this brace knocked out and get this header wrapped up. So there we have it, a brand new 321 stainless 2JZ GTE Pro Mod turbo header, made in record time, and I am very excited and very happy with the end result. So I went ahead and braced the wastegate provision. I feel much better about that now. Everything is cleaned up, everything is done on it, and this is a wrap at this point. I love building headers. I am happy that this one is completed. And the next order of business on that thing will be some titanium exhaust parts. That won't be in this episode. Obviously, this one was centralized around building this new header, but that is what we have to look forward to next episode on that wild big turbo Supra. So let's do a once over on some of the features on this here turbo header. So we start with one of my billet 2JZ GTE head flanges, and I opted to not do the silicone bronze trick on this head flange just due to the fastener clearance between a lot of these fasteners and where the tubes or pipes, where the conduits for exhaust gas interface with the head flange. So I just welded them with some 347 stainless filler rod, as that is the appropriate filler rod to use with 321 stainless, and you always want to use the filler rod that matches the more noble of the alloys that you're working with. So moving past that, we have individual EGT bungs for each of the cylinders. The primary step out, like there's a step here, 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 so on and so forth. They step from 1 5/8 of an inch or 1.625 inches out to 1 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch 750 thousandths. From there, we go into our really nice collectors. And as I was blowing all of the metal shavings out of the inside of this header from all the fab process and everything, each one of the ports was trying to pull my hand up to the head flange. So we know that this has good scavenging built into it. From the primary collectors, we go to our 2 1/4 inch secondary tubes, to our secondary collector, and then out of the secondary collector, we step up to 3 1/2 inch to match up to our ProMod turbine inlet flange. We have a 60 millimeter tile wastegate provision here. And like I showed earlier, this is a coped bend, so that way we are both changing direction and giving ourselves a good path and good priority of flow. As you guys can see the giant port on the inside there, up to the wastegate, to the valve face, allowing it to do its thing. So like I said, this is all minus the collectors and the head flange. This is all Stainless Bros 321 stainless construction. And I rant and rave all the time about their products, and there's a good reason for it. The surface finish that they have applied to these tubes saved a ton of time in the build process. The quality of the bends overall, not really any ovaling or anything like that as you cut into them, saves a whole lot of forming, and the price point is not horrible on them. They are readily available. So if you guys need any stainless or any titanium for that matter, please, please, please check in with Stainless Bros and Tycon respectively. They have just about anything that you could possibly need or possibly ask for any of your fabrication projects, and they are constantly coming out with new products to better aid we, the fabricators, in our jobs in building cool things like this ProMod header. So with all of that being said, and I am whooped after going at this hard for the past few days, I think this is as good of a point as any to wrap this episode up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all these different adventures and all these different journeys with me. I am having a blast building the new turbo setup for this crazy big tire Supra, and I hope that you guys are enjoying coming along on the journey and adventure with me. In a very short period of time, this thing will be careening down the track at World Cup Finals, Budds Creek, Maryland, at the big imports versus domestics race. And I cannot wait to see how fast they are able to go with it. Don has chosen all of the right parts for this thing, and I am elated to play the small part that I'm playing in the greater Supra project that is this thing behind me. So if you guys are going to be at the track, keep an eye out for it. If not, then either look up on probably Flow Racing or something like that. Point being, look up the streaming services for the race if you are so inclined, or wait for somebody like 1320 Video to release their coverage of the event, and I would almost guarantee this car will make an appearance in that video. But with all that being said, and before I drone on any more, that'll be about the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, and I will see you guys in the next episode.